Okay, so hello viewers. We're live from Factory Berlin for Sónar+D 2020 in collaboration with Ars Electronica. And yeah, we're gathered here. This is interesting. So Holly and I have been working on this podcast called Interdependence, and we've been wanting to chat to you, Richie, for some time. And the opportunity came up to do it on camera.
Yeah, I thought it was an audio podcast, but now we're on video. But here we are.
We're on video.
We're
Well,
together.
This is our first ever video episode, so
Wow.
this is exciting.
Yeah, exactly. So there will be edits.
I do feel like the guinea pig.
Yeah, exactly. Like
You're in the hot seat.
Yeah.
exactly. But yeah, so we were here. I mean, Holly, you wanted to talk a little bit about COVID, maybe, to get things started. That's like the easiest.
Yeah, I mean, it's such an unprecedented time. You know, when we arrived here, we're all wearing masks, and we're kind of still in the kind of midst of the COVID situation. And I was wondering, you know, kind of first of all, how you're dealing with the situation, and also, you know, what kind of issues have you been reflecting on during this time where you're not constantly on the road and you maybe have a little bit more time to reflect on things?
Yeah. Well, I think reflection is the key word here. Maybe, luckily, by chance, this year I'm celebrating my 30-year in electronic music.
Wow.
And actually, I had a big birthday this year. So coming into 2020, I'd already kind of planned to have some extra time to delve into where I had come from and where I was going. And it was already a reflective year on January 1st. But then, as COVID came and changed the whole fabric of time and space, that reflection went deeper and deeper. And I've actually welcomed it. People who know me, I'm pretty optimistic, and I'm pretty good at taking things as they come. So I really, have slightly enjoyed this time, if I'm honest, and we're all in completely different situations around the world, but it slowed me down. And, I'm sure we're going to get into a lot of things today, but, I've been on a roller coaster ride for the last 30 years, and it's been incredibly exciting and enjoyable, but I would even say the last couple of years have gone to another level of complexity and stress, where I was really wanting to find a way to give myself a break and really reevaluate what I'm doing and who I am and where I'm going. So luckily, I was able to kind of pivot straight into that and disappear for the first little while into my isolation in my studio and kind of delve into all those things that were rattling around in my head, and also start to connect machines that I had lost touch with, and kind of allow my creativity to take me through this time. I was always an introvert. Yeah. I found computers when I was in my teens, and I felt very connected to technology, and it allowed me to connect to people, and I guess, find myself and become, over time, even technology allowed me to be an extrovert. But this has been a very introverted time for all of us, and I think we can only take this time to look into ourselves and come out as better people, as a better world. There's a lot of things. This isn't just COVID that's going on. There is so much going on in the world, and especially in electronic music and in, let's say, my community or my scene, that needs to be thought about and discussed. And I'm happy to dig into that.
Yeah, let's do it.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, that's in conversations we've been having with others around COVID, trying to be somewhat sober about it. The one conclusion that we ended up coming to is that, when the kind of fast-paced, people are on their social media accounts, some people are traveling around, some people are at work and feeling like they're having to juggle 5 or 6 jobs, whether or not they're defined as jobs is another question. When everything slows down, in a sense, you do get to look at things kind of for what they are. And one of the one of the kind of maybe optimistic things that I think has come from this period of time is exactly, it's giving us pause to reflect on foundations, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
the argument that maybe we might make is that if you see the period of the 2010s to the 2020s being this period of kind of relative excitement that everyone has the internet in their pocket, mega companies turning up, mega centralized kind of social networks turning up, and kind of reshaping the world in their image.
Yeah.
It's very, very interesting to see what systems are perhaps resilient to something like this, and what things just utterly collapse, right? And one thing that, we'll touch on this a little bit more, that I think is notable for yourself, and it makes sense when you say you've been in the studio. One thing that is notable is that you haven't been out playing shows. And I think there's been a lot of warranted criticism online of people maybe jumping the gun and jumping out there to perform. And of course, it's a complicated issue, right? Because one of the products of this decade from the 2010 to 2020 is this idea that touring fundamentally is the way that many artists earn their living.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I think it'll be interesting both to talk about that, like the sense of responsibility or perhaps lack of responsibility of people who are jumping back into live shows, but also with the sense, maybe a sense of generosity to suggest that, that issue to me is another example of a rotten foundation.
Yeah.
Quite clearly now, the fact that people are having to jump so much into shows is actually less, as much a critique of the individuals who are maybe jumping the gun as it might be a critique of where we've allowed the industry to go, that people need to do that.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, I think in my industry, for sure, what you've seen is, the gig economy, the superstar DJ, inflated fees, and crazy amounts of everything has just been more. And at least from my, viewpoint, as the DJ has become valuable or more valuable, music, especially in electronic music, has become less valuable. So looking at what everyone, especially the DJs and artists what they've chosen to do with their time, I think is really telling. I see more DJs and artists gravitating towards doing a stream.
Yep.
And I don't know if, there's not much finances in stream, and there's people doing gigs now. So there's financial issues, there's social issues to reach out and have some connectivity, but there's also ego issues and a whole bunch of other things that aren't actually as pretty to discuss. But the thing that is, this problem about foundation is, we came, as an electronic community from the 90s where we were very self-sufficient. We could make our music, we could press, distribute, make a living, and tour, and it was like an ecosystem that you made a great record to tour, you went on tour, you played your record, other people's records, you heard other, and you were like, okay, I've got to go back to the studio. There was a real healthy balance of all that. But over time, and definitely connected to the 2000s and the 2010s of how music has gone from being a certain value to kind of download and to stream, those types of revenue opportunities have, let's not say dried up, but let's say they have changed dramatically. The sad or strange point is that, and this is what makes it me feel like we really need to look inwards into our community right now, because we are unlike any other community that's out there musically. Most of, there's a couple of, like jam bands or cover bands making some good money, but for the most part, if you're a band or traditional music and you're on top of the game and making good money, you're making it by playing your own music. DJ community has always been about championing and promoting and playing and celebrating other people's music. And that's the beauty of it. But back in the early days where that, you played a great record and people bought the record, and there was this financial, economical ecosystem that was healthy. Now, the DJs have suddenly been elevated to this incredible stature, and they're still making their performances with incredible talent, but still based upon playing mostly other people's music, which has not caught up with the changing in streaming and economical business models. You know, so there's some unfairness going on. And what's happened, you know, I think that with COVID, we've had, like, we knew this was happening. I knew this was happening. But during COVID, you've had suddenly performers jumping at streams which haven't been, you know, monetized, which is totally fine. Because if they were monetized, the money would go in the wrong way anyway. But and who is actually benefiting right now? Well, there's a, you know, Mixcloud is out there for streaming and they're monetizing, but most of the other platforms that are being used or even have accelerated their popularity with music, like Twitch, who are now playing catch up, you know, weren't set up for this. So you have DJs playing other people's music. The DJ is getting the promotion. The DJ is connecting to their fans. But the artists who are making those records, you know, who are supporting all of our careers, are at home trying to make more music or not seeing any income streams and having an even more difficult time during this time than anyone else in our community. You know, and that's this community was built on music. This community was built on sharing and inclusivity and unity on a dance floor. And actually, when the DJ was just over there or there on the same kind of platform, and you know, it was one. And I, you know, and that still exists. And but the framework around it and the economics of, and especially now how incredible wealthy this scene is, has not caught up, and there is a complete financial inequality that really needs to be discussed.
I'd agree.
For sure. And I mean, one component of this that I feel like we should definitely touch upon is, you know, when you're playing other people's music, it's oftentimes kind of removed from its original context. And so one conversation that's been going on for a while in techno is how kind of you know, popular and vibrant European electronic music economy is, where a lot of those origins are in African American musics. So I wonder if you have any thoughts about that, of how maybe some of the kind of vibrancy of the economy here could somehow flow back to some of the originators.
Well, I think the vibrancy of the economy is based upon DJs. You know, they're the ones who are driving it, and those are the ones, for the most part, benefiting financially. You know, and you know, there are mechanisms for performance rights with the PROs and things like that, which are mostly working, or, you know, are put in place, and when working, should be facilitating some type of economic payment to the artists. But I actually think there needs to be something more. You know, we're 30 years into this. This is not just a COVID. COVID is giving us a time to kind of look back. You know, when we started, and you know, when I always say we, because it was we when we started. You know, and it was so small, and we were hopeful that the electronic scene and community would go maybe 5 or 10 years, and then we hoped that we could actually help spread it and become what it is. But actually, now that we're here, you can notice that we've made incredible strides, but we've lost something. We've lost a connection to some of our values, and we've lost the connection to keep everybody in a safe way. And so I think at this moment, we need to look at, you know, creating or facilitating another level of assistance for our internal culture. You know, I think that goes back, that, you know, 30 years in now, that some of the producers from back in the day are in their 60s or 70s. Some of them aren't traveling as much. Some of them can't. Some of them signed, including me. I had to get some of my rights back. You know, luckily I did. But some of us signed terrible deals in the 90s when we were just kids and we were doing this, and they've never seen a penny. And so I'm sure people aren't going to like this comment, but I could imagine some type of payment structure, some type of reinvestment as a DJ, that somehow nearly like a social security pension fund, or we spoke about a guild, like the Screen Actors Guild, a governing body that can look at look at the past and the present and the future, learn from the mistakes, put into effect new policy or new ideas to make sure the future looks better than what we are, and help bring this community, reunite this community, and welcome that we've had 30 years of success and set it up now for a lifetime.
Absolutely, and I mean, it's interesting because this is something it's funny, I care deeply about as someone who only has very tangential ties to club music. I mean, Holly, you have more of a history in...
Well, neither of us are DJ. I mean, I'm an embarrassingly terrible DJ. Neither of us are really DJs, but we still care very deeply about deep music communities.
Exactly, but for the interest, it's funny, whenever this issue comes up, initially there is kind of a defensive response. And I want to speak to that a little bit more to give credit to the community, actually. I mean, you have a deep, decades-long interaction with this. The people I've spoken to who also have experience with that, they describe an environment where, a certain ideology that was based on, giving individuals the ability to pick up records, go and do what they like with them, pick up some money, but also promote within a sales economy, would also in turn work. Yeah. Everybody who I've spoken to about this says, from managers to DJs to producers, that in retrospect it might be easy to say, oh well, it's a selfish ideology, but it wasn't. It was something that in the time kind of worked. And 100%. I think that the part of the reason that we're describing this series as interdependence really is to suggest that, again, the period of time of having this phone in your pocket, the period of time where you're setting up your individual social media profile, and a greater kind of economic drive to individuate us and atomize us, and present us with the individual opportunities, right? Everyone is the entrepreneur that can go out and show what you're doing every day. The argument that I would present maybe is that idea of independence, even though it's a very storied and quite beautiful history and legacy that we have, has kind of been pushed to its logical extreme, right? Where we now find ourselves, COVID in a sense has accelerated this, but I feel like it would have happened anyway. I feel like whether, talking about like impending climate change, flight prices going up, borders getting more and more restricted, this stuff is happening, and COVID has just kind of like given us this almost like a dress rehearsal for a world we don't want. Yeah. Then the necessary step is to, as you were kind of hinting at with some of your suggestions there, is to say that actually, for those who have been involved, I personally have had an almost 20-year involvement in independent music, not necessarily club music, that actually the things that most people value and cherish about these cultures are actually the interdependent parts. Yeah. And that actually the interdependent parts, I mean, you've started a label. I remember the last conversation you had, you spoke really wonderfully about, friendly competition between different label groups in Detroit. Yeah. Whereas behind the scenes, you were all having a conversation and saying let's stagger this release here. Yeah. So you're not stepping on toes. So that actually, in order to empower the individual, that interdependence was a necessary component. Yeah. And that when you overly fetishize the individual DJ or whatnot, ultimately there's a hollowness there. Yeah. And so we want to talk more specifically about these proposals, because I think it's fun to just speculate on that stuff. Yeah, yeah. But I think getting to the core of that is just to suggest that, suggesting that we might want to look at ourselves, maybe individually and as a community, is not necessarily, painting previous successes with a bad brush, or pointing out, calling out individuals for being selfish or something along these lines. But it's more to just say exactly that the narrative has not updated with the economic reality. And actually, it's people, perhaps in our position, that can do the most in these circumstances.
Yeah, well, I think I'm not the only one, but I'm in a unique position that I hear the stories, but I was actually part of those stories. Yeah, I know what was happening in the late 80s and through the 90s. And I can feel still the magic that was there, you know. And during COVID, there's been a number of phone calls and conversations to colleagues and friends, both in Europe, back in Detroit, you know, in Canada, and just, you know, reminiscing and reflecting to understand, you know, where things went wrong and how we can dial back to you know, to reflect why we all got into this, without going backwards, but with still having our own individual mission, but welcoming that we are this beautiful little, well, not little, but ecosystem. Absolutely. You know, and I think you know, it's too bad that, you know, so a lot of those discussions back in the day were kind of private and on the dinner table, because I can also see that by some of my or our actions of those people who came from the 90s, came up through the 2000s, of then, you know, bringing groups together tighter, you know, and touring with those DJs and putting, you know, your artists on stage, and then labels became showcases, became concert shows. And if you were growing up in that time, that's your viewpoint. That's your magnifying glass, and that's what perhaps what's the word? That's your dream. That's what you want to do. Mm-hmm. And so some of the context and some of the backstories were missing, and so, you know, so perhaps our generation is also part of this problem. Mm-hmm. You know, we were so excited about electronic music and traveling and going to the next place and pushing it you know, for me personally, it was always the doors open. If you truly love electronic music and it really resonates with you, like music resonates deep within, then you are welcome at my table, and I hope the rest of the larger electronic music table. But as this has become a huge economic force, and as certain factions have kind of split off and become groups, and you know, and regionality has started to kind of like been lost, you know, labels and concert shows springing up from one country and then suddenly appearing under the same brand to another country, and this and that, and suddenly we've actually lost individuality, become kind of homogenous, and lost this, you know, actually kind of neglected the independency of how to be incredibly strong in those early days. Mm-hmm. You know, I look at the landscape now, and we're all talking about streaming and the Spotifys and the Apples, and you know, streaming for me is a income source, but it's not enough. Yeah, you know, but it was also like that back in the day. We had major labels. There was Sony we worked with in Japan sometimes. There was EMI we would do a special compilation with, and it was either for a promotion or it brought some money in. But if that hadn't existed, what was underneath that, what we were capable of as a scene, we could survive. Yeah, you know, I don't know if this is a good terminology, but it was like, you know, we were at that point kind of Noah's Ark. Sure. You know, it could have sailed off and we would have survived. And I'm really, you know, there's more money in this community or scene than ever before. And it's reached the far corners of the world, but the complexities and the amount of different types of corporations and people who are involved that have been incentivized to become involved, it's coming from a different place. You know, it's not coming from the creative, the intellectual, the musical side, or the emotional side. It's coming from an economic side, and that's another part of this. This is why the economics don't work.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah, it's really interesting to hear how, when something starts out in a really small community, you can kind of, in a way, self-regulate the kind of ethos of that group. But as something kind of gets really popular and expands, you almost need kind of an infrastructural layer that automates some of the kind of like ethical decisions of that group. And I think that's what we're all really interested in with kind of like, payment systems or things that are kind of automated so that you don't necessarily have to trust someone to make the right decision. That's just already kind of baked into the practice itself.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing. I mean, one of the proposals, and I mean, I think we would be remiss in a sense. Obviously, this has been a time, COVID has been like a devastating, in various different capacities for people, but we'd also be remiss to not mention the Black Lives Matter protests that have been occurring, and I think they resonate particularly deeply within whatever this community is,
100%.
in so much as, as I say, incontrovertibly, this is a Black American creation in a sense, right? That we all, and the difficulty in a way is compounded, I think, not only by the distance and let's say, the fact that there is government support and subsidy within Europe for producers, artists, DJs, and that is sadly lacking in the States, and I don't think we have much power to do something about that. However, it is undeniable that this kind of global industry is heavily, heavily concentrated in a European context. There is not much of a domestic audience yet for this kind of music. And so when we start thinking also about, COVID brings up ideas of interdependency globally, right? It's not only selfish to your neighbor, it's selfish to someone that you've never met, who might be infected by someone who gets on a plane, right? And same, I think, Black Lives Matter also gives us pause maybe to think, well, as you said, there are producers who, are getting older now, and you can have, as you say, a white DJ with the best of intentions in a European context, making, 60% of their income from playing, Black American music. And as you say, I mean, I want to talk specifically about, because I actually think you've shown leadership on this issue, specifically in relation to your work with AFM, the Association for Electronic Music, which for those who don't know is kind of like almost like a lobbying group or like a think tank lobbying group. And a number of years ago, you and a bunch of others whose names I'm going to space on put forward an idea, get played, get paid, right? Yeah. And I just want to, I think COVID, BLM, as I say, for me, it's only accelerated these conversations in sense of urgency. And I think that it's worth validating and also discussing a little bit, the efforts that you made initially on that particular issue, because it's more than, as I say, when we start talking about our duties actually. And as you put it, the great opportunity that we have actually to have a scene.
Yeah, but I think duty is a right word. I think we all have a duty to look after our brothers and sisters in this community. And the longer you're in it, the more that duty, should resonate with you. And perhaps that's also we're learning about the lifetime. What a lifetime in electronic music is right now, so maybe that is, it is something that I'm interested in, and maybe that is part of where I'm going to be, to talk about this and bring these issues and think about where we were, where we are, and where we're going. I think with get played, get paid, that came from kind of something that was in between both economic structures with a project that I did called Twitter DJ. And that was in the late 2000s when downloads were still prevalent.
A thing.
People were still paying for music.
Downloads were still, the core of the income streams. And the idea was, that was a conduit with my Tractor system and other DVS systems. So when I played, a tweet went out, and you could go online and see what I had played. At one point, we were able to scrape the Beatport system and actually give people direct links to those songs. And to go and purchase. So that was
I just want to interject. This is for some people that aren't familiar with this. A lot of DJs are really secretive about their playlists, and like you'll go up and ask what the song is, and they won't tell you.
This is an issue.
As if they own the music themselves, or they made it.
No. This is something that I've always fought against, and there has to be full transparency. You know, back in the day when there was a white label and nobody knew, and the producer had decided to do 100 of those, and the economics, he or she had decided to give those for free. Oh, there was 100 that were actually paid for through special records. Like, it was a completely different thing. Yeah. But by the 2000s, to not let people know what you're playing so that people could, you know, go and purchase and celebrate and spread the word of electronic music and get people paid. You know, talk about equality.
Sure.
You know how you know. So that was this kind of the first iteration of that, and then that as streaming came in, we could see that letting people know what music was being played was not going to generate enough streams, you know, to actually bring too much money into anyone's pocket. So could we then use that with AFEM and with Pioneer and their record box system, and actually drive that information to the PROs, you know? And it was a successful campaign. 10 PROs from around the world took that as the initiative to bring digital recognition systems into their collection, structure.
And just to ask a quick question, so every club pays a fee to the PROs to be able to broadcast music.
Yeah.
And so where does that money usually land? Does it actually land in the hands of electronic producers, or does that tend to go towards the kind of mainstream pop acts?
It usually goes into the wonderful black box of, you know, uncollected royalties and monies, which then gets split pro rata to the people who did get paid. So normally that was, or still is to the most part, going to the people who have the biggest checks already. The Madonnas, well, I guess Beyonce these days, and people like that. So one, you need to get the data to the PROs. Two, they need to have data already in their systems to connect that so they know who to get paid. So there was also a double-edged thing where some DJs didn't want to release their repertoire. Like if it's just the music you're playing that makes you a good DJ, like I know it's all about music, but there has to be something more. There's timing. Yeah. You know, we don't even have to get into that. But if you're really scared about that, you're in the wrong business.
Right.
You know, and you're in the wrong creative. You know, so that was a problem. There was also reluctance of clubs being connected to a system and, you know, sending information. You know, people. You know, data privacy, but I won't say it was a perfect system.
Sure.
But the intention that people should have looked at to get, without music, the scene doesn't survive.
Yep.
You know, and I'm not just saying any music, like, you know, deep, creative music which takes time and energy and emotion. Like this brings me up to Mr. X from Spotify's thing of saying you can't make an album every 2 or 3 years and be an artist. You have to, like, you know, engage and make content, and that's bullshit. That you know, like, that's coming from somebody who's looking at money and has no connection to the creative process.
Absolutely.
Sure, we need to engage in this world and have social media, but to make good music and not just quantity that you can just throw in a system, you know, needs time.
Yep.
You know, and you know, we you know, we'll get into AI and things later, but you know, if we're afraid of the future, you know, and we're just making, you know, quantity over quality, machines can probably make quantity much faster than us.
They can, yeah.
Sorry, so I went on a sidetrack there.
Well, I'm glad Spotify came up, because I think that it actually speaks to what I wanted to talk about next. But I think too. So, as a disclaimer, I mean, when you talk about like the wicked problem, the hornet's nest of getting people paid, you're right. You have clubs that have various different opinions on this. You have various different kind of technological implementations from music recognition technology to pen and paper. You have DJs who are more than happy. You have DJs who never submit set lists. You have producers who never register their works.
That was a point that I missed.
No,
very,
but
very
still,
important.
so it's a wicked problem.
But that's also an education point, and talking about having a guild that can help foster and keep our ecosystem healthy is also about education.
Absolutely.
Because most of the musicians got into electronic music. Maybe a lot of musicians fell into music because that's what resonated with them. Maybe they weren't good in math. Maybe they didn't even finish school. Like I dropped out of university before I finished, and you just go by passion most of the time, and then you're kind of catching up. And I already made a point about people who lost their rights in the early days, and then there's people. It took us a while to figure out what SOCAN was back in Canada, and why do we register this? They don't care about us. Well, actually, let's not go there. But SOCAN actually was one of the PROs that came on board with the initiative. So I was happy about that.
But what I was saying, on the topic of Eck and dunking on, let's say, the last decade, I also think that one of the conceits, and maybe this is where I start to become, what's the word, heterodox or something, but one of the conceits of the 2010s too is this idea that Eck, to give my most general reading on Spotify, right, is someone who clearly has no, as you say, no history in music of place or purpose or musical communities, clearly, right? So let's give him that. Let's just say, okay, well, he's naive, he doesn't understand that. But the sheer absurdity, in a sense, of proposing one solution, a one-size-fits-all solution for every musician. And Holly, you've spoken really well about this in the past. But I would, in a same sense, with all the respect and love to PROs, in a way, I would look at PROs as having, again, almost an impossible task of setting standards, protections. It's almost like an insurance policy, the lowest possible insurance policy to ensure that everybody has a certain degree of protection under the law and that they try and get everybody in the world.
For all music.
For all music. And what I like about ALFM as a lobbying organization and the initiatives, and hopefully what we'll end up talking about in this discussion, is saying, well, look, to me, I've spoken to people at certain PROs and I've said, this specific problem, you have a 50-year-old producer in Detroit who I could say is probably making people hundreds of thousands of euros a year. Are you going to solve this in my career span? And not one of them has said yes. And so the question for me is saying, if we're going to critique the one-size-fits-all model, is it sufficient as a DJ, or as anybody who's interested, I'm not a DJ, anyone who's interested in this, to say to that 50-year-old in Detroit, well, actually, we just got to wait for this person whose main job is like wrangling all these different things in a different community, not thinking about this specific community. Is that a sufficient excuse? And to build off of that and maybe push it forward toward proposals, one of the maybe controversial proposals, you hinted at it earlier, that we've talked about in the past, is saying, well, actually, the best way to determine the value of a song is to ask how much is this song worth in the place it's being played. And the way to determine that is to say, how much is the person playing it getting paid? Right? And so that is a kind of a very different...
Flesh that out a little bit, because the PROs often go by crowd size.
They go by crowd size, ticket price.
And that's not always in sync with the DJ fee. For example, when something's a corporate sponsored event or...
For example, so a lot of major festivals will invite corporate sponsorships in, and the fee for the headline DJ will not reflect the ticket bursary, right? Because they got extra sponsors in to top that up.
Well, I think your point here is that the PROs have a way to go, but they are on the way.
Absolutely.
For tracking and electronic music and having the repertoire inside. There's been more education. We're all talking about this. So producers, old and new, I think, are registering their works that weren't registered. But what can we do in addition? Because it is, we keep saying ecosystem. Ecosystem isn't one thing. So, yes, back to the point that we're kind of skirting around here. The driving forces of this economic community is DJs. They are the ones making the money. They are the ones predominantly playing other people's music. We know that's not always going to the right people, and we know that now, after 30 years, there's some other things that need to be put in place to assist this community from the past, that where things weren't done correctly, for the present, and how we set up the future to never have those things happen again.
Yep.
So this was one of those things about reflection where we were coming in this year. This is, for me, this is not a COVID epiphany. This is just a deeper understanding of this problem now, and we really need to create some type of, I can imagine like a membership or like a guild, something that basically a percentage, some type of mechanism that takes part of a DJ's fee and goes back into the community, into a structure, perhaps AFEM. I know there's a organization in Detroit, the Detroit Electronic Music Foundation. These are popping up. So these organizations need to come together. There needs to be someone to help that and to make initiatives. And first, we need to help the last 30 years of what has gone wrong. Where, are there healthcare issues? Are there royalty issues? Are there legal issues? That need to be helped? Then, right now, we need to think, okay, well, what do we need to put into place to make sure that doesn't happen again? How do we make sure that there's equality through education, through mentorship, and inclusion, so that everybody who like invite people in. We always wanted to invite people into electronic music, but the dance floors I was on in the late 80s and 90s were inclusive and diverse. That's not the case. So how do we bring that? And not only for the dance floor, but how do we bring that into the producers, also to the DJs, so that in the future, we're not sitting here trying to figure out, well, how do we make a lineup that's more inclusive? How do we balance, making sure there's the right genders and the right colors and all this? Like right now, we're doing that because we're trying to fix a problem that we've lost control of. And we need to make sure that in the future that happens naturally, and the people naturally come up who are diverse in background, in color, in gender, in creativity and ideas, and it's that whole thing that puts them on the top stage earning the most money.
Absolutely.
But we can only do that. We're the only ones who can reinvest our money. And I don't know what the figure is. I'm sure it's a percentage, because I think everybody, if you're making money playing other people's music, you're making $500 or $1,000 or $100,000, there should be some part that goes back into this, and we celebrate that our culture is unique in its celebration of everyone's music together.
Absolutely. And I'll say on that, I mean, the details of this are particular. I mean, whenever I've thought about it, I actually thought at some point it would be nice to have a cutoff point where this kicks in a sense of saying you don't want to cut things off at the ankles.
No, I don't agree with that. I think this should be something that you aspire to as you getting into the electronic music, and then you have your first gig, you pay your first due. And you're like, hey, I am part of the community. Like back in the day, we would be on we would have a call with Mike Banks or Jeff Mills, and be like, what are you guys doing? Hey, who's making your labels? Or did you have a problem with this pressing play? Oh yeah, okay, so we should, that's what was happening. And that's what needs to happen now, and not just between me and them, between us.
Absolutely. And I'll say, I mean, we were having this conversation the other night. Number one, I think we're all in agreement. This is why the absurdity of the one-size-fits-all is actually a huge wasted opportunity for stuff that we're involved in a sense of, again, going back to the PROs, right? There are so many atomized musicians who don't come from a community, and that's not their aspiration. They're good at playing guitar, they like songwriting, they want to sign to a label, they want their song to be on the radio. But I've met people who are incredibly successful at music where, this kind of scene mentality is completely alien to them. And that's fine, there's nothing wrong with that. But we were saying the other night, and one thing I think, it's a superpower. It literally is a superpower. You can drop me in the middle of Tallinn, and if you give me 15 minutes, I might not want to do it, but I could probably find someone that I know I could talk to for 5 or 6 hours. I said the same about professional sport. I can talk to anyone in the world about football because it's a superpower. but as exactly you said, this kind of due-paying, it's, again, like, framing this conversation not necessarily as anything punitive, but instead as a celebration or an act of kind of stewardship and an act of connection, I think is actually completely the right way to look at it. Because it makes sense to me. All of the romance, as you say, plur, this unity, all of that romance connotes that you and the person partying in New York right now, you're connected through that signal. You're on the same wavelength.
And look, electronic music predominantly, okay, I'm coming from my own perspective, but predominantly, especially Detroit style, was there was a lack of vocals. It was pure,
Don't knock vocals.
pure rhythm and frequencies that touched us on the dance floor. And that music from Detroit, Chicago, New York, that electronic music has touched people around the world. That has resonated beyond language, beyond border, beyond every other thing that we can add on to that, and has connected us. Like that was the power of electronic music. That is the power of electronic music, and that's why, and there is enough power to create an organization to celebrate that.
Absolutely.
Well, there's something you said a few minutes ago. You were talking about the kind of like past mistakes, the present situation, and wanting to have a future ecosystem that works for everyone. And I think this is really interesting, especially given that dance music, if we want to have that kind of umbrella, is what, like 40 years old now? So it's like, how do you keep an art form that is several decades old? How do you keep it kind of vibrant and exciting and new? And I think that's by investing in the next generation of producers to make that next generation of music that's responding to today. And, of course, a great set will combine the past, present, and, near future. But yeah, I think just to touch on that a little bit, to keep the art form vibrant and exciting, we really have to invest in young producers.
Mentorship, education, and if I look back at my history, like the early '90s, there was like the +8 period, and you had me and Kenny Larkin and Daniel Bell and John Acquaviva and Joachim Pop, like from all corners of the world, different denominations, and we were kind of like a gang, and together we had this energy, and we drove each other, we challenged each other, and then along with the other labels which were around, and later on I had the Minus kind of gang, and I actually wasn't even making as much music then. I was much more of a kind of a mentor of listening and critiquing, and those things for me have been as rewarding as being in the studio, making my own music, or being on stage. And so that's why, these kind of issues are important for me. I have, sometimes, I'm driving and tour. Well, I used to tour and drive in cars with other performers and DJs, and sometimes the younger generation that I'm meeting, sometimes people, I get a sense that, because it's become a job for us and it's our livelihood, it's seen as a job to others, and that's what they mimic. But this isn't a job. This is a lifestyle. This is what I live and breathe.
And a
this
privilege to
This
be
is
able
what
to
keeps
do
me
it.
up at night in a good way and a bad
Yeah.
way. And the dream was that I could do this for the rest of my life, and that I could actually make a living. And if I can, I want to see that dream for me. I want to see that dream for everybody.
Absolutely.
So this is, this reflection of 30 years of music, of my 50th year of COVID, this is the moment to like grab that. Zoom channels are open. People have time. Everyone has reflected. Along with everything that has been coming up the last couple of years of equality, of Black Lives Matter, like everything is there. All the mistakes that we kind of knew were happening are right in front of our view. And I'm not here to, we can't fix the world, but we could fix our scene.
Well, that's the thing, and I would argue this I've been arguing this like quite heavily in a sense, is that when you talk to people, I mean, people who say kind of speculate on the music industry and they have these theoretical concepts, and I'm like, this is the other superpower of coming from scenes, is that you understand that scene is everything. Scene is the value. Right, you have economic things that happen around scene. No, but scene is the value, right? Like the idea,
belonging.
Absolutely, but exactly. Like I'm sure for some it is an attractive proposition to be a lonely person playing records for an abstract group of people.
I know. I love being on stage by myself. I love the power that technology gives me. I can do my own thing.
But you're not lonely. You come from a scene.
Yeah, but I love being in the studio by myself with my machine. So then my friends there. But you know, into amongst all that, being in the middle of a dance floor and feeling part of something, feeling welcomed by people. I remember on those early dance floors looking around, I saw people who, a wide-eyed 17-year-old, white kid from Canada going into Detroit. I was like, wow, there's some different people here, extravagant, different sizes, shapes, colors, and, dancing crazy, and it was like, this is amazing, so that's what we're talking about. That is that inclusivity.
Yeah, exactly. It's the value, and that's the thing is that that's the value that changes lives, right?
Yeah.
And like it can often get to be very dry and boring, like talking about payments and fees and this kind of stuff, which is a very necessary thing, but fundamentally. That's the value. I mean, we talk about it often. We're very close to a festival called Unsound in Poland, which is middle of, Krakow, in the middle of an atypical place one would expect.
Richie's played that festival.
Oh, there we go.
Yeah,
okay, excuse me.
I saw your set one year.
Yeah.
Oh, there we go. No, but we were there last year. We played a show, and I remember in the evening we went out to the hotel forum where they do these kind of big concerts. And I walked from one room, and there was a producer from Uganda playing. I walk into another room. There's a band from Indonesia playing. I'm like, you would not expect this was happening in Poland, but I have never seen like a more diverse cast of people, and there is nothing but scene music that could have made this happen. Yeah. And it was a little bit of like an emotional moment actually, where like I don't tend to be too soppy, but I was like, this is remarkable, And I think that again, it's the ability, even for the person in the suburb or in the small town who watches this stuff from afar, the ability to contribute to that, it's a path that changes your life. Yeah. Because you meet other people, you end up traveling, you end up meeting and bettering yourself through these kind of shared protocols. And that's why, I mean, we should close up pretty soon, but I think it's very refreshing to talk to you. Obviously, you have very different experience from us, but again, a shared commitment, I think, to that path.
But like taking the Unsound, which I think is an absolutely incredible organization and event, unfortunately, that's not the norm. We need more events like that where there is
that's true
diversity, and that's where I can see, that the diversity is something that we need to bring back into, because that is at the core of where this started. Absolutely. I can see it when I close my eyes. I can feel it when I close my eyes, and that's something we're going to have to, for the near term, really fight for. We were planning our 30-year anniversary +8 tours for this year, which are canceled, and that was going to be a celebration of where we came from and where we were going. New artists, young artists, artists from everywhere, from all types of backgrounds, and all the promoters we were talking to were really open. They were actually excited that the lineups were so inclusive. But then, even post-COVID, I was invited for a live stream, probably one of the largest electronic music live streams that has happened, and I had to, I couldn't do it because the lineup that was on offer was so wrong that it was just unacceptable. And so why I'm bringing that up is like it's back. The DJs have the power. Yeah. What we say goes. That's not to end up on a depressing note, but that's why I find it a little bit sad that some performers are going out now to DJ, not only outside, but even inside clubs, packed, with absolutely no care about the safety and the issues that are going on. I'm here to make the club, I want the clubs to come back. I want to be on the dance floor first.
Absolutely,
That's where I want to be. But, wear a mask, something.
Yeah.
And, this country has this rule or whatever.
For now,
You're the, I hate this word, you're the influencer, you're on stage, and whether this rule is that photo, those images are going to go around the world of you playing with no social, like, come on, like, let's lead with a good example, We all want to get back onto the dance floor. We all want the culture to come back. And it's another reason why we need to work together. Because I think club world is it's not even a country policy here of how clubs can work. It should actually be a global policy for how clubs can get back on track. So it's just, for me, just putting that, like, we need to find a way to invest in ourselves and build, rebuild this community for the next 30 years, for the next 100 years, for the next 300 years.
That's why I like some of the ideas that you all have been bouncing around about kind of like automated percentage shares, payment systems, because like you mentioned earlier, like most people are in it for the music and they just want to think about the music. They want to think about their set. They want to think about this track they're producing. They don't want to have to think about this kind of like behind the scenes infrastructure. So I feel like because we're kind of infrastructure nerds, that's how we can contribute to this conversation by coming up with these kind of systems so that it can become an automated thing that people don't even have to worry about, but can still feel good about.
But those systems, I just read an article also about the kind of the back end of label and music applications and how to automate. So it's actually a nightmare. Like, I have a label and you're getting all these, Excel files still, then that goes into kind of another software which then generates the royalty slips, and then you have to basically send out maybe automated emails, but then there's still transfers. Like we have thousands of lines, we have hundreds of tracks in the +8 and minus catalog. Like, I'll be very honest here, I was looking earlier this year to release the catalog.
Yeah.
Because it was such a weight,
such a burden
on actually my shoulders, because I was just like, I hope we're doing it correctly. And one of the beauties of COVID that we were able to actually go through all the old databases, clean it up. I'm now in touch with all those artists. But the main thing here is, like, especially in an ecosystem that is, a lot of musicians and artists and DJs are label owners. We're in techno. Like, why isn't all that stuff already working in the back end? Why, why can't those things be automated? Like, this is why I love
high-tech music, low-tech back end.
Yeah, but even Bandcamp is a great example where it's like there's good monetization there, and if you set up the deals right, you can actually, if you kind of hack the system and have like a page of your favorites, you can bring all your artists in who are kind of like your label and have direct deals with them and let them get all their money directly, nightly, weekly. It's not perfect, but like that's for me a good model. Like, so it's not only about fair monetization; it's also about on-time monetization.
And easy, yeah.
I mean, if we had another hour, I would regale you all with the benefits of smart contract systems. However, sadly, I don't believe. Yeah, I don't believe. But just on that point, I think these kind of things are becoming cheaper and faster to make, which is also the good news. Yeah. And we had a long conversation actually with a friend of ours, Jesse Walden, who's one of the kind of, or if not the guy kind of pushing for an ownership economy is this concept he's bringing forward. But Jesse and I for years worked on proposals for basically smart contract rights management in music, and you can do it. Actually, the most difficult part is being able to ingest historical stuff. If you just started today, you could build a system that would be remarkable. But I think you can also work at two speeds, right? And so, and the other thing I do want to say on top of that is, again, like to go right back to the beginning, this is about kind of assessing foundations.
Yeah.
and saying, as you say, with the diversity issue, COVID is a brutal photographer, right? There's no makeup, there's no lighting, right? Like, if you cannot have a diverse lineup when it's a Zoom call, you haven't got to pay for flights, then that's a pretty.
There's something rotten at its core.
It's a brutal. That's a brutal photograph of where we are. And similarly, on top of this kind of like rush back into clubs, I cannot wait. I'm in music for live music. Yeah. If it weren't for live music, I don't think I'd be in music, to be quite honest, because it's the passion. Everyone wants to go back, but again, it's a brutal snapshot where, and I can only imagine.
We don't want to go back.
No,
we want to go forward. That's where we want to go. That's where we want to go.
Yeah, but exactly, we do want to go forward. And as I say, it's a brutal snapshot when I'm sure it's a combination of interests, right? It's a combination of there's some ego, there's some like utter irresponsibility. There's also probably a few people who are doing this out of sheer necessity.
Agreed.
And so,
but you can, in sheer necessity, you can still act responsibly.
I 100% agree. And so I think it's been a wonderful conversation. I think we probably need to wrap it up for time.
Yeah, this has been fun.
It's been really wonderful, and I hope we can jump back at some point in the near future to maybe talk more about, whether it be with AIxMUSIC or anything else, like what that looks like, and who all else can come to that table.
Yeah, well, hopefully the table, we're creating the table by this discussion and talking about these themes. This is, we have more time ahead of us. Sorry to say, this is not going to change overnight. And so let's use every day, week, month, or year to come out of this stronger together.
Absolutely. Wonderful.
Good.
So that
Thanks.
was, Interdependence podcast live from Factory Berlin.
Check us out at interdependence.fm.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you very much, Sónar+D in collaboration with Ars Electronica. And I guess we're all online in various capacities. So if you put, I don't know, like hashtag guild or moving forward or something like that, then I'm sure that you have a lot more comments on your social media than I do.
Well, I'm waiting for the comments after this.
Yeah, exactly. But I'm sure that there's opportunities to continue the discussion going forward. So, Rich, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, Holly.
Yeah,
pleasure.
Let's take a break. Thank you all.